Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and in a previous episode I talked about picking up the Rites Commander deck precon and how I had customized that for myself and built it out a little bit from what it is. So first let's take a look at the deck on Moxfield. I'll point out a couple of the cards that I have cut. One of those being Sorin, Lord of Innistrad. I'm not really a big Planeswalker player. It is cool to have like a vampire Planeswalker, but it doesn't actually count into the vampire tribal. He makes little vampire tokens, and they do. And the emblem's okay. And this is pretty cool, but I'm not really counting on it necessarily. I think Bloodline Necromancer I might have removed. That's okay for Recursion, but And like, it's not a bad card. Like, I'm not cutting, I'm just making it more what I want to play, I think. Let's see, Champion of the Dusk. I think I cut this as well because it feels like it's not, at times, it's not a great draw, and when it is a great draw, it's a big loss of life. And there are life drain mechanics, and I did try to deepen the life drain mechanics within the deck, so this could work better in the deck as I have it now, but I did cut it because it feels like in the wrong scenarios, this card just doesn't work out well for me. Dusk Legion Zealot. I mean, that's an interesting draw effect. In fact, this may even be something that I would switch out for like Rowan's Grim Search, which is now in my deck, just to give me a similar effect on a vampire body, because I am trying to build a really creature-heavy deck. Legion Lieutenant. I mean, this is a vampire lord. It makes my vampires thicker. That's pretty cool, but and you know, it's basically an anthem on a vampire, but I don't know. I think I'd rather have just, I mean, it's again cool for a deck that wants to do everything within creatures, but you know, I don't really think I need it. It's not necessarily where I'm going with the deck. It is, again, good card, but not what I wanted so much. Martyr of Dusk. This is a pretty easy skip, though. It does create a couple of vampires for 2 over time. It's also, it works pretty well with the commander as well, because it'll create you another vampire to go off with. So a lot of value there in certain ways. Good. And like, this is, look, this was a good precon deck as it was. But I just didn't think that this is a very powerful card, so I pulled it for some better stuff. I think I ended up pulling this card too, even though it's a sack outlet that creates Dark Ritual effects. But it's a tap 4. If I could do this multiple times and just blow up a lot of my field, that would be pretty cool to add a lot of mana. But I think I may have pulled this. I don't remember putting this card, typing this card in. It only creates 1 vampire token no matter how many attack. Also, it's non-token, so there are situations where maybe I only have tokens to attack with. Especially if I'm holding this guy back and attacking with his tokens. Not a bad card, but just not one that I wanted. This was a little bit too expensive. I know it's got a lot of effects, and it has Convoke. And if I ever get really creature heavy on the board, and that's possible, this could be really cheap for a lot of power. Also, it's interesting that it gives my other vampires Exalted. But I feel like if I'm going really wide to get this card out... oh, wait. Hold on. All of them would exalt it, though. It would have, like, +1/+1 for each creature when it attacks. Oh, man, that would be very powerful. Also with the lifelink. And the fact that it has haste would just beef it very... Wow. Yeah, I guess that could be a big game changer. Maybe I'll think about that card if I need some top-end power. But I'm thinking about making the deck work a little bit differently than that. That's certainly worthy of the sideboard, I guess. Redemption Choir is interesting, and I could probably pull the Coven effect off fairly reliably, but at least if I have multiple permanents. But I don't really want a card that's necessarily dependent on me having a big board state. Timitar is really interesting, however, he creates bats. That's my issue with him. That does not synergize with my commander. It's And maybe I'm being a little bit too tough on a theme here, but I want even his tokens to be able to turn into... I just want to turn this into a demon factory in a lot of ways. So having non-vampire creatures just isn't what my deck wants to do. Cool card. Definitely gives me some synergies with this deck, but not as strong as synergies as I necessarily want. Viscerous here is an interesting sack outlet. This is a strong card. However, I just don't feel like I want that necessarily. I mean, it could enable some wins that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get, but I want to have other ways of doing this, and you'll kind of see what some of those are later. I think I got rid of Vrona too. That feels kind of expensive. I mean, it's a destroy target non-land permanent. That's a really permissive spell for a tap and 7 life, and she can kind of gain the life back, especially since she has vigilance, so she could attack for 4 and get me some of that life back, and then I could tap her to pay that effect. So not a terrible card, but a little bit I mean, not even really that expensive, but I did cut some of the top end I want this deck to come out swinging in a lot of ways. I think I cut Pact of the Serpent. Same reason as that other card that did the same thing but was on a vampire. I would rather have Champion of the Dusk, honestly, than Pact of the Serpent, just because this at least comes in on a vampire body. I feel like that fits better, but I'm not... I mean, it's a strong effect, especially when you're starting with like 40 life and you have a lot of extra life gain to work with. But I feel like this is one that I would have to work back into my deck if I feel like it would work well. And I haven't really tested it in 4-player Commander, so I'm not entirely sure how that would work. I've tested in 2 and 3-player, but we'll see. I think I cut Village Rites. That's a good draw spell, especially if I want to sacrifice things. I think I also cut Return to Dust. That's a good spell, honestly, but well, no. I don't really have other ways of dealing with that, honestly. I think I might have cut the Glasscast Heart. And the Heirloom Blade. The Mind Stone, the Signet, Talisman. So a lot of the mana rocks, Wayfarer's Bauble, largely because I was just pumping more vampires into it, more cheap vampires into it. And then I think I cut Kindred Boon. It's interesting. It's certainly and there is also a world where that's a really strong card in this deck, even as I've built it out. So this is definitely one that I might put back in. March of the Canonized, I think I also maybe removed. So a lot of those cards are in there, but that's the initial precon and some of the things that I removed and why. This is the deck that I have, and you can see that, let's see, let's compare it. 35 creatures, I've gone to 39. Let's see, I have 8 enchantments, so I actually have more enchantments. Adding in things like Bloodchief Ascension, Animate Dead, Bastion of Remembrance, Grave Pact. I do have the same number ultimately, but I added some things. So Crippling Fear, I guess I'll talk about a little bit later. Rowan's Grim Search is the one that I was thinking, oh, maybe I could remove that to add another vampire. New Blood. Olivia's Wrath. This is another way of wiping the board. And another way of wiping the board. So we'll start to see that in a second. Let's see. Hold on. 37 lands to 37 lands. So I haven't actually changed the land balance of the deck at all. It's still pretty low to the ground in a lot of ways. 3-cost commander. So those are my adjustments. So now let's talk about the deck. 18 basic lands. So about just under half of my lands are basic. They're going to come out real quick. Let's talk about my commander first. Cavaleño, First of the Blessed. So whenever I attack, target attacking vampire that isn't a demon becomes a demon in addition to its other types. First off, This turns other vampires that are not demons into demons. Those demons then gain the effect when this creature dies, draw a card. Oh wait, I haven't been drawing a card when I do this. This is so much better than I thought it was. Draw a card and create a tapped 4/3 white and black vampire demon creature token with flying. So I want that card draw to very often draw me a vampire. This is something I had never honestly thought about in this deck before, because I swear to God, I did not read those 4 words, draw a card, and I was just so focused on the fucking vampire demon that I didn't notice that this commander builds in card draw. Amazing. We can make that card draw happen a little bit faster with sacrifice engines. However, I don't really want multi-sacrifice engines necessarily like the Viscera here, because this guy's only going to be triggering once per turn. He can only make 1 demon per turn. And sure, you might be able to get multiple on the board and unkilled, because people very often won't block your vampires because they know what comes next is worse. But you can force them into some uncomfortable decisions that way. Take the damage, or take more damage later that you might be in an even worse case of blocking. But if you don't take the damage at all this turn, you know, then you have to deal with that flyer, and I get to draw a card. So, very strong commander. But this deck also has a lot of strong commander possibilities. So I actually got this because there's a Dracula alt art of it. And I picked a couple Dracula cards for this deck because I really wanted a heavy vampire theme. This is going to be my replacement Vampire Lord. When he dies, he returns transformed to the battlefield as a legendary artifact called Edgar Markov's Coffin. At the beginning of my upkeep, he creates a 1/1 black and white vampire creature token with lifelink, and it puts a bloodline counter on Edgar Markov's Coffin. Then, when there are 3 or more bloodline counters, remove those and transform it. So, don't really have a way to proliferate this or get more counters. So basically, this becomes a token engine for a couple of turns, and then flips back over and becomes a way to make all those tokens bigger, which is neat. I like it. This would be a really interesting commander to have on the field, because I think you can make the choice when it dies to return it to the command zone or make it a token generator. That would be interesting. A couple of lesser commanders, less exciting commanders. Bartolome. It is interesting. I think there's a lot of decks, but definitely very different decks from this, that would really appreciate having a legendary sacrifice engine. That being said, this isn't necessarily that deck, so this isn't one that I really want to use as a commander, but I wanted to list it as an option. It is something interesting. I also think Alas Ilkor, one of the only non-vampires in my deck, and in fact, I may pull him just because of that, and also because his effects are a little bit slow and not quite on brand. It does kind of add a life drain source, but not... I think this card would be really, 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 really easy for me to cut, honestly. But I also don't think it works well as a commander, because a lot of these other commanders have a ton of beef. Draina and Lamvala being a really cool example of this. So this would take me more in a stacks direction. And this is a really interesting vampire / stacks piece. So Flying and Vigilance, 3/4 for 4. Really heavy on the symbols, especially heavy on white, considering this isn't a very white deck. There's only 4 planes in here, and half of our mana base was non-basic, so was basic, so that really tells you a lot. Activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. First of all, that's fucking huge. That's just going to create a whole bunch of trouble when it comes onto the field. Draina and Lamvala has all activated abilities of all creatures your opponents control. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate those abilities. This could do nutty things, and in fact is probably the most expensive card in the deck. Also could make a pretty neat commander. Elendra, I think, was the alt commander that was intended for this deck, as it was built as a precon. She has lifelink. She is a 1/1 for 4. But whenever another creature dies on either side of the field, put a +1/+1 counter on Elinda the Dark Rose. And then when Elinda dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elinda's power. So if you get rid of her right away, she creates a 1/1, and that's really bad. But this deck likes to make other things die. So there is the potential to build up Elinda really high and maybe even sacrifice her off or let her die to the demonic curse. And then not only do I have my demon and my card draw, but I have a whole lot of little tokens that I can turn into demons. Pretty cool. Let's see. Carmen Cruel Sky Marcher was also in the deck, but not a commander option. And this is also a really interesting one, especially if you go more sacrifice heavy, because you can trigger this off a lot. There's also potential to make opponent sacrifice things like Sheoldred's Edict that could also trigger this. I feel like this would be a bit of a different deck if we were to run Carmen Cruel Sky Marcher. I don't think she could really helm this deck necessarily, but she does have synergy with it. So flying 2/2 for 5, whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, this is a bit more specific than Elinda, which is unfortunate, put a +1/+1 counter on Carmen and gain 1 life. So there's a lot of strategies that can be built around her ability to gain 1 life as well, that already exist within the deck and could be built upon. But whenever Carmen attacks, return up to 1 target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to Carmen's power from your graveyard to battlefield. So a couple things start dying. I mean, right off the bat, she can get you your like 2-drops back, but she'll be able to get 3, 4, 5, 6. She'll be able to reanimate anything in your deck every time she attacks, with only a few creatures dying, and it can be very easy to do that, especially with Bartolome or something on the field. Let me also talk about Vito. So Vito was also from the set. I got a showcase art of him in the little promo pack that came with my deck. So this guy's been in my deck from the beginning too. Flying, when you sacrifice another permanent, you gain 2 life if this is the first time this ability is resolved this turn. If it's the second time, each opponent loses 2 life. If it's the third time, create a 4/3 white and black vampire demon token with flying. So he can make vampires himself. You have to sacrifice 3 things within the same turn to do that, and he will life drain 2 on the way. I think this is a little bit harder to pull off, and maybe for a slightly different deck than the one that I've built here. Again, one that was maybe had the Viscera, was a little bit heavier on sacrifice engines. This guy could be the commander, but he definitely has potential, and he still works in this deck pretty well. Let's look at also Felisa. So Felisa is from Strixhaven. So she is one of the few vampires that isn't either from Zendikar or Innistrad or Ixalan in here. She is a teacher there. She 3/2 flying for 4, pretty good. Mentor, when this creature attacks, put a +1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power, so she can build up smaller creatures, and I have plenty of them. I mean, just think about any of those 1/1 token lifelinks. So suddenly they're lifelinking for 2, and even if you block them and kill them, I'm still gaining 2 life. Whenever non-token creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, create X 2/1 black and white inkling creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of counters it had on it. So I know I cut Timothar, Lord of Bats, because he wasn't vampire-y enough for me, and she creates inkling creature tokens. However, they're bigger. They're 2/1s instead of 1/1s. They're also black and white, which will help with another card that I'll show you later that, I mean, it's really good. And so it's not necessarily getting as risky of getting cut as like a Lasso Core, but this also allows me to make a lot of them too. And I think like this, can you imagine this comboing with Elinda? So both of these are on the field. Let's say Elinda's a 5/5. I create a 5 white vampire tokens with lifelink, but I also create, say, 4 2/1 white and black inkling creature tokens, and because of my commander, I create a 4/3 demon token And like, it's at this point that you're really wondering, how in the world could I possibly work green into this deck for like doubling season and stuff, because it's looking like it's going to generate a lot of tokens in a lot of different ways. But those are my potential commanders, and those are kind of the beefiest. These are all vampires, so this is all still like a creature section, vampire creature section. They're also all dual color creatures, which might come in handy at a certain point. So a lot of those had ways to add counters to things. Let's add some more. My favorite of these is Blade of the Blood Chief. This is also the reason why the deck is almost all vampires. I want anything in this deck, for the most part, token, creature, whatever, to be able to equip this and trigger the secondary condition, because we'll just ignore the first part and say whenever a creature dies, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it if it is a vampire. It will put +1/+1 counters on other things when creatures die, but this could be a way with, say, a board wipe or a mass sacrifice that doesn't necessarily target me. That could put a lot of counters on this and make all sorts of other impressive vampires very powerful. And when you also have strategies like Felisa and Elinda, putting it on one of these two cards is just nutty. Putting it on Drana and Lamvala would be absolutely insane because it has vigilance. So it's just swinging with evasion and just, oh wow, Elinda is actually more expensive than Lana and Lamvala. Got a nice card with this deck. Also, this was a pretty expensive get to come with the deck. There's like $100 of value in the deck as it was. Cordial Vampire, we talked about, or we saw this in the previous deck list, but whenever Cordial Vampire or another vampire dies, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. Well, that's going to be really easy to do. It doesn't even say non-token creature, so blowing up tokens builds my whole board simultaneously. This is going to be really good at building up tokens. I mean, just utterly ridiculous, especially just for 2 mana. Drana, Liberator of Malakir. So flying in first strike, 2/3 4/3. So pretty good right there. But here's what makes her special. Whenever Drana, Liberator of Malakir deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. It's quite nice. Now they have to survive combat to get those +1/+1 counters, but that's still a way to put a lot of counters on the field very quickly. Then we have Ghost Lantern. Ghost Lantern does a couple of things. First, this is an adventure spell, so I could cast this for 1, but I want to try to Bind Spirit first, which is going to return target creature from my graveyard to my hand. So this gives me Recursion. But whenever a creature I control dies as an artifact that goes down and equips both for 1, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. So this can function as Recursion, and that's one really special thing about it. But this is also a Blade of the Blood Chief without the vampire condition. So this is a way to kind of stack those effects. Indulgent Aristocrat is a multi-sacrifice engine, but he also has the effect, the same effect as the Cordial Vampire. He also stacks with the Cordial Vampire. So if you can get Cordial Vampire and the Indulgent Aristocrat out, you can pay 2 mana to blow up one of your, preferably, tokens to put 2 +1/+1 counters on every other vampire you control. Very cool, especially when that death trigger is also going to be doing so much more in this deck. I mean, it could be getting you other +1/+1 counters on things with these cards as well. So all of these, again, well, this one's the only one that isn't a death trigger. This is an attack trigger. So now we have Necropolis Regent. Flying 6/5 for 6. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So anything hitting my opponent is going to make it big. This is similar to the effect of Drana. However, Drana only puts 1 +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature that survives. Likely the ones that are dealing damage. Often when you get blocked, you're not going to live. So typically that's just going to be anything that survived. With this one, anything that survived gets +1/+1 counters. Not just 1, but equal to its power, essentially. So that's a big deal. But it's also a big drop. So this is really the big boy version of that effect, I would say. Yahini Undying Partisan for 3, a 2/2 with haste. So that's very good all by itself. Whenever a creature your opponent controls dies, so this doesn't work very well with my sacrifice stuff. However, it does get me +1/+1 counters when they block and die, which is great. I can also use this as a sacrifice engine to give Yahini indestructible. If I can keep other creatures on the field, I can keep Yahini indestructible and keep building it up, hopefully. It would be really broken if Yahini could put +1/+1 counters on it while getting indestructible. And that's probably why it doesn't work out that way. And that actually hurts its synergy with my deck. This is kind of on the edge of something I might cut. Charismatic Conqueror is a 2/2 Vigilance for 2. That's already pretty good. I mean, essentially that would be like the vampire version of the Arvindale Fealty, the adventure side of the Virtue of Loyalty, which would also be fun in this deck, but maybe not. So this says Vigilance. Whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield untapped and under an opponent's control, they may tap that permanent. If they don't, you create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So either your stuff comes in tapped from now on, artifact and creatures. So this is going to cover, you want to play a mana rock, you either have to bring that mana rock in tapped and really slow down your game plan a bit, potentially, or you have to give me a vampire. This is kind of like Blind Obedience, but on a vampire in a lot of ways. Dusk Legion Sergeant is a 2/2 for 2 with Menace. Again, good already, but if I pay 1/1 black, sacrifice Dusk Legion Sergeant, each non-token vampire you control gains Persist until the end of turn, which means that when it dies but had no -1/-1 counters on it, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. That's excellent. It's unfortunate that that effect doesn't maybe bring this guy back, so that I could do some really goofy stuff with him, but in a deck that can give, I mean, first of all, this is a way of like saving my entire board, right? So if somebody board wipes, I can sacrifice this guy for 2 to save the non-token portion of my board and put -1/-1 counters on them. Then I can basically remove those -1/-1 counters on him, and if I could get this guy back from my graveyard, I could do it all over again, potentially. A little slow, and I don't necessarily have the recursion to do that regularly, but this guy can keep me safe from board wipe, and I think that alone is important enough to have him in the deck. Elendra's Hierophant is a 1/1 for 3. It has flying, though, and whenever I gain life, I put a +1/+1 counter on it. This isn't limited to a certain amount of times per match, so when we're talking about some of the life drain effects in this deck, if, let's say, I drain 1 life every time a creature dies, and there's, say, somebody gets just their board wiped and they lose 4 creatures, that's 4 +1/+1 counters for this right here, because that's 4 individual triggers for it. This card, much like Elenda, can get really nutty, and it's just, she's almost as good as Elenda, because also when she dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens where X is its power. So it has that same effect from Elenda as well. So this is basically a second Elenda, but it has a different way of triggering that I can also only I can fairly reliably farm this one as well. Nighthawk Scavenger is just a really strong card. So it is a 1+X 3 for 3. Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink. Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. So this could get all the way up to a 9/3 potentially, if you really mill somebody or they lose a lot, but if you put, say, a land because there's a shock land, and this is in your opponent's graveyards, by the way. This isn't just one opponent. You have 3 opponents in Commander, so let's say somebody plays a shock land, somebody blows up an artifact, somebody loses a creature. That's 3 already, and those could be completely different players. This card is going to get big. And then... so that brought us through our counter stuff and through our creatures. So now that we've seen all that, let's talk about the drain package, because this gets pretty big. This is 11 cards within the deck, so it's a very significant part of the strategy. I want to have multiple of these cards out at once, so I'm getting as many as I can in here. When Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, this is an enchantment for 3. Create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So that's a little unfortunate. Again, I want to create vampires, but this is fine, because whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, again, when I'm sacrificing things, when my things die in combat, you really just don't want my creatures to die at a certain point, which, you know, keeps me insulated a little bit against board wipe. And then I deepen those connections with things like Blood Artist. It is a 0/1 for 2 whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies. Any creature, anywhere, anyone's board. That's very important because this effect is so much bigger than the other one. Just important to note. Target player loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. So this, during board wipe, if this stays on the board during board wipe, people will lose so much life, and I will gain so much life. I misremembered something about this deck as I was explaining it, and that is that because creatures like Blood Artist, say, whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, in the case of a board wipe, they are always going to get triggers for everything, regardless of if they survive it or not. They don't have to survive it to get the triggers. If they can trigger for themselves dying, then they can trigger for other things that die at the same time as themselves. And they don't even have to trigger to target themselves to do this. That's just the speed at which this works. And I was being conservative about that, and therefore I thought that you would have to keep one of these guys alive to actually get that effect. When instead what you would want to do is keep alive whatever creature was wearing, say, Blade of the Blood Chief, or potentially your commander, or just somebody. Give either your biggest thing or the thing that stands to profit them. I mean, like, again, if something has Blade of the Blood Chief equipped and you can keep it alive during a board wipe, you're probably going to win the game. If somebody doesn't have spot removal for whatever creature that was, because holy crap, that's going to be big. And it doesn't really matter what it is. That's a lot of death counters. And again, this deck is almost entirely vampires, so that's going to be 2 counters per. Bloodchief Ascension is an enchantment for 1. At the beginning of each this actually does absolutely nothing when initially cast. At the beginning of each instep, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. There's a lot of ways to do 2 damage to people. Your opponents will do it for you. In Commander, this card is just kind of broken, just because you can play it on turn 1 and have it active on turn 2 if each of your opponents takes damage. Maybe it's really generous to assume that all of your opponents will take damage, or someone will take damage every turn that's not you after casting this, especially since your opponents will probably attack you. But it does have that potential. That is possible, but it gets really oppressive when it's actually all the way triggered. And again, this being really easy makes this an amazing card. It's cheap, it's easy to get fully triggered. If your opponents haven't played against it before, they're in for a nightmare if they don't have enchantment removal, because when this card gets to 3, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if they mill, if they discard, if a creature dies, importantly for this deck, but also if they cast an instant or a sorcery, a non-permanent spell, any time a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if a Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So this is one of the larger life drain effects in this deck, and it's also one that goes off so very often. It is still triggered by tokens dying, is my understanding. I might want to look up the rules judgment on that, because they do go to the graveyard. They do fizzle, but they still go to the graveyard. So just board wipe. And again, like creature-based board wipe that keeps this on the field drains a ton of life and sends me a ton of life. So this really, and because it's an enchantment, most board wipe isn't going to target it. This is a really good way of getting around the fact that a lot of symmetrical board wipe would remove a lot of my sources of this type of stuff. That's also one thing that's really cool about Bastion of Remembrance, going back to this, even though it doesn't really benefit from everyone else's creatures at the table dying in the same way that some of these others do. Cliffhaven Vampire is a 2/4 for 4. It is a gold vampire creature, so it's both black and white. It has flying, so it has a good evasion. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So if you stack this in with any of the other effects, while I may not be gaining as much life, they will be losing as much life as if I had 2 Blood Artists or whatever on the field. Next card is Cruel Celebrant. This is a black and a white, so only 2 for a 1/2. Whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, insulating me a little bit from board wipe in particular, but maybe not the best thing for the entirety of the board for bigger combos. So let's go to Falconwrath Noble. 3 and 1 black, 4 total, 2/2 flying. That's okay, but whenever Falconwrath Noble or another creature dies, this targets everybody's board. Target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So a lot of these other effects have had an interesting little problem in that you don't get to target the loss of life. With this one, if I blow up 12 creatures on between 3 people's boards, I can take all of that loss of life and target it at a single player. I could potentially take somebody out of the game a lot more targeted with Falconwrath Noble than a lot of the other effects in the deck, which are going to hit all of my opponents roughly equally. And if you're pissing people off that much, potentially, if you're draining the entire board regularly, then you probably want to be able to take people out, because otherwise you just have a lot of people gunning for you. Luckily you have a lot of health. Maybe that'll help. Then we get the Malakir Bloodwitch. This is going to be a 5-drop, 3 and 2 black, a 4/4 with protection from white and flying. When Malakir Bloodwitch enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life equal to the number of vampires you control, and then you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So if I have like 4 vampires in play, I drop this card, my opponents each lose 4 life. Well, actually, I would have 5 because of the Blood Witch. So each opponent loses 5 life, total of 15 damage, and I get a total of 15 life. So that's a pretty good later game bomb. And just imagine this after like Elenda or Elenda's Hierophant dying and creating just an absolute insane amount. Or like stacking this in with Felisa or something and just creating a ridiculous amount of vampire tokens. And then playing Malakir Bloodwitch to just wipe everybody off the face of the map. This could end games, I'm just saying. It would be a situation where you're already probably winning, but this would definitely like bring that win home before somebody might board wipe. Sanctum Seeker was in the original deck. It is a 2 and 2 black, 3/4 for 4. Whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So if I'm attacking with 5 vampires, you're losing 5 life. Well, actually, you're all losing 5 life and I'm gaining 5 life. So 15 damage, 5 life gain. And again, this is also potentially triggering Ellender's Hierophant 5 times, putting 5+1/+1 counters on that. This is also potentially triggering Cliffhaven Vampire, which is getting me another 5 damage to everybody, so 10 damage to everyone, and I gain 5 life. So this triggers with some of those. This is a way of doing life drain offensively without having to blow up creatures. And I want this deck to be really aggressive. It's going to have a lot of creatures just for the trying to get as many vampires on the field for some of these effects as I possibly can. It's going to be a really creature-heavy deck, so I want it to have really strong offensive draining options as well. I want to be able to drain offensively as well as sacrificially. I think if I can combine both of those effects, this deck might really brawl. Next up is Vindictive Vampire. This is a little bit more expensive, but it gives me a solid version of the effect. Whenever another creature you control dies, so unfortunately this only targets me, and it's a 3 and 1 black, and it's only a 2/3, so it's not a good body. It's not good for its cost. However, it does give me this effect. There are a few things that do, so I'll take it. Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent, and I gain 1 life whenever one of my creatures dies. Again, this only targets me, but which is a little bit unfortunate considering some of the other cards I have access to, but still alright. And then we have Vran Executioner Thane. So this guy is a legendary Phyrexian vampire. He has a really crazy looking face and a really thorny Hellraiser looking body. And he is a 2/2 for 2, so he's really cheap. Decent body, but you don't want to really put him in combat. Whenever 1 or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This ability only triggers once each turn. So this isn't really going to be the big damage dealer for me, especially because it only triggers once each turn, but it's going to be a way to add in a little bit more of that damage. I want as many sources of this type of effect as I can, and this is a 2 life drain, so while it's considerably slower in some ways, unless I start triggering it on opponents' turns, and it's very easy to do that. If you attack into me and I chump block, you're going to lose 2 life. Well, you're all going to lose 2 life, and I'm going to gain 2 life. So you can trigger this, especially with an offensive defense kind of brawler like this, more often than you would expect. But it being stuck to only, again, my side of the board, which is something I've complained about in other cards, but again, like, this effect is great regardless. I'll stack it as many ways as I can, no matter what it targets, basically. And it has a doubled effect compared to a lot of the other cards that we've looked at. There aren't many cards that do 2 damage. We saw the Bloodchief Ascension. We also saw Bloodchief Ascension. Yeah, it was just Bloodchief Ascension. I mean, technically some of these other ones do more, but because they trigger more than 1 time per turn, and like the sky, the limit on them is very high. But this guy, I think is pretty good. And you could definitely build a deck around him more specifically that would be really cool. There's Spicy MTG Deck Tech did a $15 build of this, which, you know, doesn't include shipping, but okay, I get it. So definitely an interesting card. And that Deck Tech actually uses a lot of the same cards that I'm using here, and probably a couple cards that I'm going to pull. One of those cards that is in both decks is the Laporte Cutthroat. I loved playing this in. I actually pulled this a deck based around this in Limited when I was playing, what was it? Zendikar Rising, I think? I don't, Oh, it doesn't tell me the names. Okay. I think it was like Zendikar Rising. But I got to play this guy in Limited, so I got to play him in the pre-release draft. That was fun. So whenever Laporte Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Again, this is targeting you, but in the context of Eldrazi, it was really easy to sacrifice your own stuff to this to get this effect. So basically it was just as good as a Blood Artist in that deck. It's not quite as good here, but it's still worth having. So that brings us to our next package, and this is going to be draw. Again, we're trying to do a lot of this draw with vampires, so let's start out with the basic Chromatic Star. There are ways to sacrifice artifacts in this deck. I think Bartolome can sacrifice artifacts to himself. So this is a kind of a secondary way. You can sacrifice this to Bartolome and draw a card. Next up, we've got the Crossway Troublemakers. This is going to be 6. It's a 5/5 for 6. But it's going to give attacking vampires I control Death Touch and Lifelink, which is amazing. They're going to... My little 1/1 tokens will be able to obliterate your stuff. Unfortunately, they already have Lifelink, but my bigger things that are hitting you that you also don't want to block, but for which the Death Touch is probably irrelevant because they're bigger than your creatures anyways, those guys are going to gain me a ton of life. But if you ever do line up with one of them and try to kill it, whenever a vampire I control dies, I may pay 2 life and draw a card. Now, with everything having lifelink, I'm going to have a lot of life, so I can... You better bet I'm going to be paying that 2 life every time something dies and drawing a shit ton of cards with this. Rowan's Grim Search is one that I ran into out of Wilds of Eldraine that I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. This is very similar. This is an easier to cast Sign in Blood that maybe does more if I sacrifice a creature. Maybe it also causes me to sacrifice a creature. Maybe that's good in this deck. But in practice, I think I might like Sign in Blood better, especially with how black this deck is. But also, maybe I don't even want Sign in Blood in this deck. Maybe I want a vampire that I lose 1 life and draw a card, like was in the original deck instead of this. It wouldn't look as deeply, but it would also be a vampire body, and I think solving all of my problems with vampires is exactly what I want this deck to do. Next we have the Twilight Prophet. This is a 2/4 for 4, 2 black in that mana cost. It has flying and ascend. So when this is on the field, if I control 10 or more permanents, I get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And this is going to do a number of things for me. But they're all context specific on cards that I have on the field. Sometimes the City's Blessing does nothing. So while the Twilight Prophet's on the field, if I have City's Blessing, at the beginning of my upkeep, I reveal the top card of my library and put it into my hand. Each opponent then loses X life and I gain X life, where X is that card's mana value. So oops, actually, it looks like the Twilight Prophet, while it's definitely draw, I think this actually fits into the drain a lot better. So let's go with Vampiric Rites. This is, I think I switched this out for Village Rites, or switched this in for Village Rites. It is a 1-cost enchantment that allows me to pay 1 and 1 black to sacrifice a creature, and then I lose 1 life, I gain a life, and draw a card. I'm so used to drawing a life. I'm sorry, drawing a card and losing a life with black that actually gaining life is interesting. So this is a pretty cool effect, and it also gives me a sack outlet, a repeatable sack outlet. There aren't a lot of these in this deck, and it's also a draw engine. So I figured having a draw engine / sack outlet was really nice. Then we've got Voldaren Bloodcaster. I think I also have a vampire or a Dracula version of this as well from Crimson Vow. So this is a vampire wizard 2/1 for 2 with flying, so pretty good for that. 2/1 flying for 2 is pretty good. Whenever Voldaren Bloodcaster or another creature you control dies, again, a trigger that I like to have and can trigger a lot with this deck, create a blood token. So that's an artifact with 1, discard a card, sacrifice this object, draw a card. So it allows me to pay 1 sack to loot, essentially, except that I'm discarding before I draw. Whatever. Black looting. Whatever. Whenever you create a blood token, if you control 5 or more blood tokens, you get to transform the Voldaren Bloodcaster. Voldaren Bloodcaster becomes a 3/3 flying creature, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target blood token you control becomes a 2/2 black bat creature with haste in addition to its other types. So I know I said that I pulled Timothar because of bats, but hey, this gives me blood tokens, which again can be sacrificed to draw cards. This could be a card draw engine. They can also be sacrificed, just like the Chromatic Star, to Bartolome and to some other things that care about sacrificing artifacts. So getting a bunch of blood feels like a cool thing for this deck too. It's really thematic. It had a look, I might not run this card because of the whole bat thing if it weren't for 2 things. They're 2/2 bats instead of 1/1s, but also there is a Dracula themed card for this, so I'm just going to play my Dracula card. Welcoming Vampire is a 3-drop white vampire, 2/3 flying, so just great body. Whenever 1 or more creatures with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability only triggers once per turn. So yes, I have my problems with this ability only triggering once per turn. However, I have a lot of ways of generating little tokens or things that have power 2 or less. So this is kind of a card draw per turn. I like it. It works. Then for enchantments, we got Promise of Aclazats. So let's talk about this as its sorcery adventure first. I like to cast these first. Sacrifice a non-demon creature. If you do, create a 4/3 black and white vampire demon creature token with flying. So this is another way of creating demons. It's also another sack outlet, but also imagine what happens if I use this to blow up something that my commander has made a demon. Now I have 2 demons. 2 demons off of that one. And then I can cast it as its enchantment form. That enchantment is going to say at the beginning of my end step, you may sacrifice a non-demon creature if you do populate. So again, think of this as a combo with my commander, because my commander makes a thing. Oh no, I can sacrifice a non-demon creature, so I can't actually sacrifice things. Oh, wait, no, both sides of this say sacrifice a non-demon creature. So this actually explicitly doesn't combo with my commander, but it basically does my commander's things. I'm not mad at it. Like, it allows me to multiply my demons through population. I can also sacrifice some of my counters. I could even populate other types of creature tokens if I wanted to. Honestly, reading that's non-demon, not realizing that, not having played this and realized that before, kind of rains on my parade a little bit, but it's still not bad, even though it doesn't combo with my commander quite as well as I thought it would. Radiant Destiny is also kind of my board anthem. This is a enchantment for 3 in white. It has Ascend, so this can also give me the City's Blessing. As it enters the battlefield, I choose a creature type, vampire, of course. Creatures you control of the chosen creature type get +1/+1, so this gives my vampires +1/+1. But also, as long as I have the City's Blessing, they also have Vigilance. So it's pretty easy to get the City's Blessing, and I can probably have the City's Blessing by the time I cast this pretty easily, especially if I'm getting a lot of tokens onto the field, especially if I've done any Elenda stuff and gotten a lot of my tokens. So that's going to give them Vigilance, which is going to make me an offensive defensive threat. It's going to force people to attack into vampires. It's also going to force people to defend hordes of vampires, because I'm going to attack with everything. Because everything I have has Vigilance, so I might as well attack with all of it. I kind of want it to die anyways. So the game just gets really rough when I have Radiant Destiny on board. As Etchings of the Chosen, this is a 3-cost enchantment that costs both black, white, and colorless. As Etchings of the Chosen enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, vampire. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1, so this is another vampire anthem. Choose your own tribal anthem. For 1, and sacrifice a creature of the chosen type. Target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. So, with this on the field, not only do I have an anthem, I also have a way to really smartly respond to board wipes for 1 mana and a sacrifice. And again, you're responding to the board wipe, so you still have all of your creatures. This is the last chance you're going to get to use anything like this. The sacrifice in this, in that context, means basically nothing. This is really great into board wipe. Then we got Swiftfoot Boots. Equip creature has hexproof and haste. It costs 2 to play and 1 to equip. This is a commander's staple and a really good way of giving, say, your commander something that you really need to keep on the field and keep away from burn or removal on the field. That being said, it fails hexproof as a concept, fails to non-targeting spells, and that's going to be basically all board wipe, as long as it doesn't say target in the text of the card. It does not interact with hexproof. In fact, if you only have 1 creature on the field and it has hexproof, and I tell you you have to sacrifice a card, the hexproof doesn't matter, much like the indestructible. I had somebody, I referenced this earlier, but I had somebody in a match today, earlier. I played an artifact, played a Tithing Blade to make them sacrifice a card. They responded to it by giving their only creature hexproof and indestructible, and I was like, okay, well, you still have to sacrifice a creature. Indestructibility doesn't mean you can't be sacrificed, and neither does hexproof. Sorry, you targeted it, not me. So Swiftfoot Boots is pretty cool, but does still fail to board wipe. But it would still likely stay on the field. And, you know, I can play my commander again, equip it again, and it's back. So here's my ramp. There's not much. As you probably noticed when I was talking about what I was pulling from the deck, a lot of the ramp got removed, leaving only the Arcane Signet, which is going to be able to add black or white. Commander Sphere, which for slightly more mana can add black or white, but also can be sacrificed to draw a card. These being artifacts, I can also sacrifice these to Bartolome if I want to, or something like that. But that sacrifice wouldn't trigger the draw on this, unfortunately. And then everybody's favorite, Soul Ring. Alright, we are almost through it, but let's talk about a little bit of Recursion. So Animate Dead is a classic 2-cost aura that returns any creature in any battle, in any graveyard to the field under my control. But also attach Animate Dead to it. If Animate Dead is removed, that creature becomes removed. And also, Animate Dead gives the creature -1 power. So it gets a little bit weaker in terms of power, but that's often a great cost to be able to reanimate anything from anyone's graveyard for 2. Then we got the Bloodghast. So this guy is recursive himself. And this Bloodghast himself, if he gets out with my commander, that is a major problem for people because he can just keep coming back. Bloodghast can't block. He has haste as long as the opponent has 10 or less life. And when a land enters the battlefield under your control, I may return Bloodghast from my graveyard to the battlefield. So here's the play pattern. I have a land in hand. I have not played a land yet. I go to combat. I swing with the Bloodghast. I put the demon counter on the Bloodghast. Bloodghast gets blocked, I guess. Somebody chump blocks. I get a tap demon token. Bloodghast goes to my graveyard. I play my land for turn. Bloodghast returns to the battlefield. I do it again next turn. As long as I can keep playing lands, I can keep bringing back my Bloodghast. Now, this isn't something where I can do like infinite sacrifices each turn, but it does mean that basically any turn of mine, I can probably get my Bloodghast back and have something to sacrifice. Forerunner of the Legion technically isn't recursion, but this guy will allow me to find a vampire and put it on top of my library. And then, when another vampire enters the battlefield under my control, target creature gets +1/+1 till end of turn. That part is eh. A 2/2 for 3 is also kind of eh. But it's attached to a vampire tutor, which is just amazing in this deck. Like, again, 2/3 of the cards in my deck are vampire creatures. This can tutor for most of my deck. It's just an excellent card for that reason. And then we have Oathsworn Vampire. Oathsworn Vampire enters the battlefield tapped, but I can cast Oathsworn Vampire from my graveyard if I've gained life this turn. So I pay another 2, get my 2/2 tapped Oathsworn Vampire onto the battlefield from my graveyard. This guy is maybe even more recursive if I can set up any sort of drain. Any sort of drain will trigger my ability to pay 2 and bring this guy back onto the battlefield tapped. Unfortunately, he does come in tapped. That's not great, but at least he's recursive. Very, very recursive. Removal is actually a bigger package in this deck than the drain is for a number of reasons, and because there's a number of things included in it. Anwan the Ruined Sage. Let's talk about this. 5 cost, 2 black in that cost, 4/3 Vampire Shaman. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player sacrifices a non-vampire creature. As long as I don't have non-vampire creatures, this just blows up my opponent's fields at the beginning of my upkeep. For me, automatically, no real extra problems there. Austere Command is 6 with 2 white in the cost. This would be a little hard to cast if it weren't at the 6-drop space. And I get to choose 2 at sorcery speed, destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with mana value 3 or less, destroy all creatures with mana value 4 or greater. So usually what I want to do is destroy all creatures with mana value 4 or greater, because that's going to wipe the beef off the board and leave my typically much smaller vampires just fine. But also, this is a really great one for being able to blow up artifacts and enchantments. I do tend to run a number of enchantments, but not a whole lot of artifacts, so if I find a deck that's really synergizing around those, these could help me board wipe both of those simultaneously, or I could board wipe one of those, whichever is most advantageous to me, probably artifacts, with the creatures of mana value 4 or greater, or if I have my beef on the board and none of my little guys somehow or another, including my commander, actually, because my commander would get hit by that condition, I could wipe like a lot of people's tokens or stuff. In any case, getting a lot of board wipe and being able to choose how that board wipe hits the field so it's not necessarily hitting me allows me to trigger a lot of my drain effects without side effects. So then we have the Butcher Malakir. This is going to be a 4/5 flying vampire warrior for 7. 2 of that is black. Whenever Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So I don't think that I should have to explain to you how little you want to attack someone with a Butcher Malakir if you can't remove it first. Because they're just going to chump block and force you and your friends to sacrifice creatures. But also, I'm probably going to be doing a whole lot of other things in that because really all of my drain package hits my side of the board. So you're also going to be losing a lot of life as well. This is just another way to make people not want to take my creatures out, or at least target their hate to him first. Then we have Crippling Fear. This is 2 and 2 black. So this is a 4-cost sorcery. Choose a creature type. Creatures that aren't of the chosen type get -3/-3 till end of turn. This is another way of wiping the board of smaller creatures without hitting my creatures. There are also cases, because I do have a certain amount of creatures that are not, say I get a lot of Inklings on the field with Felisa, for instance. I could kill all of those with Crippling Fear after attacking with them, because they have flying, they have good evasion. I can swing in, get some damage, cast Crippling Fear, blow them up, trigger all of my drain packages, while also blowing up a lot of the smaller stuff on my opponent's sides of the field, while also triggering the parts of my drain package that also target their board. So this can be really powerful. Damn, I like for being modal. It is 2 black as a sorcery to destroy target creature, and it can't be regenerated. But I can, for an additional 2 and 2 white, so 2 white, 2 black, which shouldn't be too hard for me to get by 6 mana. You may change this, you may cast a spell for its, oh no wait, I'm sorry. It is only 2 and 2 white. I forgot how Overload works, my bad. You can change target to each, so if I cast this for 2 and 2 white, which is a little bit harder for me to cast, honestly, in the 4 slot, destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way, destroy each creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated. So this can absolutely blow up the entire board for 4. It's either a targeted board wipe in black, or if I can get the white, just destroy everything. It doesn't say that they can't be indestructible or persistent or any of those things, so it doesn't really interact with any of the ways that my deck tries to save things. So once again, I want you to think about a scenario where I board wipe, but I also sacrifice one of my creatures by putting that on the stack after the board wipe happens, or even before. It doesn't really matter, but since it's my own, I can plan around it. I can give my creature indestructible by sacrificing something off, or I can give all of my vampires persist by sacrificing something off, and then I can board wipe, and now I still have my vampires, or at least I have that one part of my drain package that is really causing that dam to do a lot of trouble. Cause a lot of trouble for people all over the field. Next part of my removal package is Deathbringer Liege. So this is one of the few cards that is not a vampire in this deck. I think Alas Ilkor is a little bit of a mistake. I'll probably be pulling that one for something else. But Deathbringer Liege is just so strong on its own that I think that it works in here, especially with as many gold creatures. That's why I showed those first and sectioned them off of the gold legendaries, because this would give all of them +2/+2. Other black creatures or white creatures I control would get +1/+1. A lot of the demon tokens are going to be black and white, so those guys would be getting +2/+2. A lot of my stronger creatures would be getting +2/+2 as well. But listen to this and think about the fact that maybe like a fifth or a fourth of my castable spells are black and white, and most of the rest are black. So whenever you cast a white spell, you may tap target creature. Whenever you cast a black spell, you may destroy target creature if it's tapped. If I cast a spell that is black and white, I can tap a creature and then destroy it. So my gold spells are going to be solid gold with this on the board, because they're all also going to double as removal spells. And then if they're a creature, when they hit the field, they're also going to be getting +2/+2 from this. So this is a really strong Anthem effect for my deck, and kind of one of the reasons I removed some of the other ones, but also like really strong removal combo with my gold cards. Grave Pact is a 4-cost enchantment, 3 black in this one, so potentially kind of hard to cast, but at least almost all of my mana taps for black one way or another. This is also a really expensive card. Apparently, I don't think I spent a whole lot of money on it. But this little preview here is showing some real janky price. Whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. So this is just another way to get, I believe it was the Butcher of Malakir effect. Yep, it's the Butcher of Malakir effect on an enchantment. So that's pretty obvious, I guess. Kindred Dominance, 4, 5, and 2 black. Choose a creature type. Destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen type. This will cause just a lot of chaos on the board. First of all, I'm choosing vampires, so unless you're playing a vampire deck, your creatures are gone. Sorry. So now I can attack pretty much unimpeded and just really maybe wipe some people out. But also consider all of those parts of my all those parts of my drain package that target other people's boards. This could, with the right cards on my side of the field, which it won't be targeting and won't be interacting with at all, ensuring that they stay on the board to really reap the benefits of everyone else's creatures dying. Again, this could cause swings of maybe 20 or 30 life, potentially, which, while it probably won't win me the game even in such high numbers, it could take people out, or it could be one of the turns that really seals the game for everybody else. New Blood is 2 and 2 black for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, I must tap an untapped vampire I control. And then I get to gain control of target creature, change the text of that creature by replacing all instances of one creature type with vampire. So I can make one of your I can make your commander a vampire. Specifically, I love stealing people's commanders because that is one of the ways to remove someone's commander that they can't get it back. It doesn't go to their command zone when it gets stolen. They now have to figure out how to either blow it up or get it back, or figure out how to play against it, because it's mine now, and it's a vampire, which also gives it insulation from some of the board wipes that I've mentioned before. So now I'm playing a vampire deck, and whatever your favorite commander is my new favorite vampire. Have fun with that. Technically, this does count as removal because you no longer have that creature, buddy. Let's see. Olivia's Wrath, we saw this. Each non-vampire creature gets -X, where X is the number of vampires you control. This would be an incredible board wipe after any Elenda type death. Where I have like 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 vampire tokens on the field, and then boom, just wipe the board and attack with a bunch of little life linkers. Patron of the Vein is 6 total mana. 2 of that is black. It's a 4/4 flying vampire shaman. When Patron of the Vein enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So this is going to at least trigger once when it comes onto the field. So you're casting Patron of the Vein, gets a +1/+1 counter and a bit of removal in addition to being a 4/4 vampire. So that's a whole lot of value coming in at once. But again, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, it gets exiled, so things aren't going to the graveyard anymore, which is really unfortunate for people, but also it puts a +1/+1 counter on my entire board. Again, imagine this in a scenario where there's just a lot of vampire tokens sitting around. Swords to Plowshares is a 1-cost instant that exiles target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Just great for spot removal. Utter End is 2 and 1 black, 1 white, 4-cost instant, exiles non-land permanent. So that's just good coverage, really. And since it's an instant, not like an enchantment or something, it can be removed, which is also something that I really like about New Blood. It's not like Mind Control or any of the blue enchantments that can steal a creature. It's not like the red ones that only get it for 1 turn. Nope, I got it from now on. Unless you figure out a way to kill it or something, it's mine now until it's reborn as your commander again. Because there's no enchantment to remove here. And again, no enchantment to remove here. It's just gone. No enchantment to remove here. It's just gone. Sorry about that. And then we have the Voldaren Pariah. So the Voldaren Pariah is an interesting one. I like the Eldrazi flavor in here. It is a 3/3 flyer for 5, 2 black, vampire horror. If you sacrifice 3 other creatures, you can transform the Voldaren Pariah. But also you can discard this into exile and then play it for 3 as well. So you can play it a lot cheaper for 3 black, and I think my deck can definitely figure out how to do that. So when the Voldaren Pariah transforms, it becomes the Abolisher of Bloodlines, an Eldrazi vampire with flying. It's a 6/5, so it doubles its power. But also, when it transforms into Abolisher of Bloodlines, target opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. So, 1, it's great for me when I sacrifice creatures because all of my drain package targets my own field. So I'm going to be benefiting from those creatures I sacrificed in more ways than just flipping the Abolisher of Bloodlines, getting a bigger flying Eldrazi vampire threat. But also in addition to that, an opponent, which I choose, is going to sacrifice 3 creatures, and I'm not going to choose to do that for somebody who is going to benefit from that at all. Like I might, I'm really going to make somebody's day bad with that. So that is the last card in the deck and the last part of my removal package. So let's talk about a couple more lands. These are more utility. This one can be cycled, but it's basically a swamp. This one can exile players' graveyards, but it's also basically a swamp. Myriad Landscape can give me 1, or I can sacrifice it to get 2 basic lands that share a type. Probably going to be swamps. Vault of the Archangel can, for 4, it taps for colorless, or for 4, it can... This does not generate colored mana. People sometimes see the black and the white and they're like, oh, well, maybe it... No, neither of them. But it is a black and white card from its color identity. You're going to need these to be able to do its effect. But creatures I control gain lifelink and death touch until end of turn. So Vault of the Archangel has a similar effect... similar effect to the Crossway Troublemakers. Death Touch and Lifelink in this deck is just really powerful, so being able to give it, just kind of having a second source of that is pretty great for me. Volatile Fault allows me to blow up some problematic lands if they arise. Also creates me a treasure token. That is a sacrificable artifact to Bartolome. Also, it can help me mana fix if I need it to. Voldaren Estate actually has another Dracula card. This is my 3rd custom Dracula card for this deck, and I think they're pretty cool. Maybe I'll kind of show you the art for those on screen. Add any color of mana, or I'm sorry, add colorless mana. You can also tap it to pay 1 life to add a mana of any color to cast a vampire spell. Perfectly cool with that. So, actually, I don't know. It has a lot of utility though, because it can also create a blood token by tapping, but also if I have a lot of vampires, this costs 1 less for each vampire I control. So if I have 5 vampires, I can basically do this, create a blood token with this for free. So this has some big utility, but we'll call this a dual land actually, because I think that's more correct. So from here, we're going to start talking about my dual lands, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. I have 13 essentially dual lands, so I have about 17 white sources. So about half of my mana base is white sources. So while there's not a lot of white in this deck, if I can contend with slow mana, there's a lot of gold. There's a lot more gold than there is white, honestly. But there's a number of white costs in the deck. Then I can make these lands, this is about as many as I really need. So Cave of Kolios, that's typically just going to add colorless for me, but I can also lose life. I'm really happy to in this deck too, because it's easy to build it up. This is a great land, even if you aren't running like Life Drain and stuff to support it. Command Tower, staple. Goldmire Bridge, Indestructible Artifact land. I can potentially blow this up to Bartolome. Yeah. And you might think, oh, you can't blow it up. It's indestructible. No, I can sacrifice it for sure. That does not stop that, as I had to teach someone in Arena today. Isolated Chapel. This is going to enter the battlefield tapped unless I control a plains or a swamp. I really love these cards. These are very, very good. As you can see, they're about $3 a piece. But this is going to be a dual land that's probably going to come in untapped, considering half of my mana base is basic. Orzhov Basilica. This is going to help me mana fix. It's a little slow, honestly, but it returns a land I control to my hand, which is going to set me up for my next land drop. I really like the way that these cards work out. Path of Ancestry is really good in a tribal deck, especially, because basically anytime I cast a spell with this, cast a creature spell with this, and, 2/3 of my castable deck is creature spells, so I'm going to be scrying 1 a lot when I have this on the field. Restless Fortress is a dual land that for 4, essentially 5, because you have to keep this open as well. Just, I think about it that way, even though it only costs 4, because it helps me not fuck up. Restless Fortress becomes a 4/1 white and black nightmare creature until end of turn, still a land. Whenever Restless Fortress attack defending player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Oh, look at that! I've got life drain in my lands. Holy shit. You'll have to excuse the fact that it's only a nightmare and not a vampire, but it can life drain, so I'm okay with that. Scoured Barrens is going to gain me 1 life. It's a slower land, but that's okay. You need kind of some cheap stuff to bulk out your deck. Shine Shadow Snarl actually has significance to Felisa, interestingly enough, from lore, but it enters the battlefield tapped unless I reveal a plains or swamp. I don't really like the way that these cards work out for the most part, but I do have a lot of basic lands in my deck, so maybe I could actually pull this off more often than I'm thinking, but I'm just not a fan of this land series. It is what it is. It's bulking out my land base. Sunlit Marsh. At least it's a plains and a swamp, so things that call to plains or swamps can call to this. Otherwise, it's one of the worst in other respects. But again, tutorable, which is important. Tainted Field. Only taps for other things if I control a swamp. Most of my deck, most of my mana base is swamps, so that's going to be really likely. Also, it can get triggered by Sunlit Marsh because that is a swamp, so cool little synergy there. Temple of Silence is a scry land. Shouldn't have to explain that. Unclaimed Territory, I'm going to choose Vampire. And then I'm going to have 1 mana of any color to cast vampire spells. So this is a dual land in terms of most of my deck, because most of my deck is creature cards. And there's the deck. That's it. So now that we've talked about all of that, I think you can understand how this deck builds really strongly about Cavaleño. It gives me a lot of ways. Well, first of all, it's an aggro deck. It's a creature-heavy aggro deck, so it really encourages me to attack. It also encourages me to have enough expendable vampires that I don't mind that they die, which means that I have a lot of instances where I can maybe turn something into a demon while it's attacking and not care if you kill it, because then I get a demon and a draw. Or I can, if you don't block it, I can just keep that guy back as my blocker from now on. If you want to attack into me, you're going to create a demon. I'm going to draw a card, and it's just not going to be fun for you. And also, every time that creature dies, I'm going to be doing other things. I'm going to be life draining. I'm going to be drawing cards. I'm going to be putting +1/+1 counters on my creatures. I'm going to be doing all sorts of other things. And I'm really hoping to line up the mechanics of vampiric life drain, also this demon possession weird shit that Cavaleño is adding to the whole vampire mythos, and Accursed is adding to the vampire mythos. So I'm trying to make this a more Ixalan-y kind of deck, but at the same time I'm definitely having fun pulling from other types and brands of vampire lore and bringing in a bunch of other interesting vampire characters. So hopefully from that you can see how I kind of plan to make this work. Either I'm going to attack you and you're not going to block and you're going to take damage, or I'm going to attack you, you're going to block, I'm going to get demons, or you're going to attack and I'm going to block and I'm going to get demons and you're going to lose life. And like, I'm just trying to make as many interactions within combat as hard as possible, because this is a deck that still does want to win through combat. I don't think any of the necessarily like aristocratic life gain tricks, life drain tricks are going to win the game for it. It still has to win in combat, but it is really trying to squeeze that combat math as much as it can by creating additional creatures, by just getting tons of benefits when things die. I mean, obviously, if things survive and do what you want them to do, that's good. So if you could make it a win-win if they survive or if they die, that's great. So that's the kind of deck that I've built around Cavaleño, and I hope you guys enjoy. Maybe if some of you kind of take some of these ideas and implement them into the precon. It's a really good precon to pick up. So they're saying that this deck is worth between, say, 61 to 117, at least buying from Card Kingdom or TCG Player, and you know, you're going to be paying a lot more than that in shipping. This is just the precon. This isn't necessarily my version of the deck. Can I look at the price? So it's saying, and I'm not sure where this is reporting from, it's saying that my version of the deck is $277. But naturally, you don't have to do all of the things that I did, and also, hold up. I'm also doing like a lot of really rare prints of some of these cards. It's really jacking up, like, wow, some of these cards got really expensive because of that. So let me fix the prices on my deck to not be like showcase pieces. Okay. Oh, there's the Bloodcaster. Turns into Dracula, Lord of Blood. Honestly, these cards weren't even that expensive either. Edgar, Charmed Groom, Dracula the Voyager, Casket of Native Earth. Really like the art on Casket of Native Earth, especially a lot more. Also, I really feel like Dracula the Voyager specifically really fits into the theme of this deck. Like the art of that, looking like some sort of a Spanish noble coming to the new world to spread his evil affliction. That really fits the theme of this deck so incredibly well. Darn Estate. He is Castle Dracula, and a really pretty card as well. So those are the fancy things in the deck. Let's get the actual bargain price. $100, which is, I mean, actually kind of a similar price to what this deck list would be. Again, it's kind of in between those two prices. I think it's through TGC Player, so I think I definitely added some additional price and heft to this. But also I want to show you, like, if you are looking to start from the precon, which again, I think there's a lot of value in here. That a lot of the cards that I took out, a lot of the cards that I left in, that kind of stuff, I really thought, you know, like, I did power the stack up quite a bit, in my opinion. But let's see. So, like, yeah, $40 to $50 online. So yeah, you can definitely get this cheaper as a precon. It's, I think, a really solid one to start with. I haven't played it as much as I would like to, but maybe this gives you some ideas about like how to build a deck, like this, how to organize a deck, how to think about it. Let me also talk a bit about some of the tools that I used here. I looked this up. I looked up this deck list here on Moxfield. This deck list, and I love you, MTG Goldfish, but, like, I don't know. I didn't like the way that this worked. I was really looking for something I'd seen in a YouTube video. I wasn't sure which client it was, but it's Archidekt. And this is Archidekt. And Archidekt, the thing that I feel is cooler about Archidekt, here's another way of looking at it, is that you can organize, and it will automatically kind of sort them into different categories. I wouldn't have necessarily picked, say, protection out. I would have probably just left those as like artifacts and enchantments or something. But you can also customize it. I did it during the video, so you got to see that. But it'll kind of show you like what things your deck is trying to do. And if you organize it a bit more by this, then you'll kind of get an idea of maybe why you're not doing some of the things that you want to do. You know, from this, I know that I have like 14 lands that tap for both colors. So I have essentially 18 sources of plains, or 18 sources of white within this deck, which is good. It's half my mana base, but also like so much of my deck taps for black, which is just great for this. But also, like, I could even sort out like all of my gold cards, just if I was curious about that for Death whatever Liege, Deathbringer Liege here. If I was curious about like how many black and white creatures or spells I had, I could just sort them all over into that, into gold. You know, there's a lot of ways that you could look at your deck, and I really feel like this as a tool helps me in a way that other deck listing services don't. So personally, real big fan of Archidekt here. Also, let's look at the deck stats while we're at it. The color distribution, as you can see, in terms of the mana, it is mainly black. I wish we could kind of factor these out because they don't, in a lot of cases, produce all that. But you can see that also my deck is like 3/4 black. So that is still a pretty generous amount of white in there. You can also see how that works out along my mana curve as well, that there's a lot of gold. It's half gold at 4 slot. You can also see just a lot of cool stats here. What's in the extras? Oh, you can see the tokens that it makes too. Okay, very cool. And of course, like, I've shown you a couple of ways of looking at it. This might make a lot more sense for people. This is, I mean, this kind of does what MTG Goldfish's site does. And, like, you know, organizing it by its, like, card type, although I wish this was not spells, it was instants and sorceries, because technically it's all spells. I mean, like, from a technical level, yes, but I'd also like to have those two sorted out. And I wasn't really able to play with what these columns are. Like, by default, this mode won't give you that stuff, but you could make it that way if you wanted to. So you could still do this within this, but I like thinking about stuff in this way. Like, this makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this has kind of taught you some things. Also, one more thing. Just a shout out. I'm not actually going to show this because I don't have this deck uploaded, but I could. Not super hard. Sure, I'll look at your Monty Python deck. So tappedout.com, or I'm sorry, tappedout.net, my bad, is one that I really, I used a lot back in the day. I thought it was really cool. I'm not as sure about that, but it does have one feature that I just haven't seen in other things, and it hasn't changed in many, many years, but here we are. Let's see, I guess I'll draw for turn. What in the fuck is that? Okay. This is also a mod. Did they like upload their own card things? Okay, sure. Next turn. Play your Maze of Ith, right? Oh shit. Actually, that's not like a land that generates mana. Damn it. Damn it. These are... Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. The Monty Python is strong with this one. So you've alt-arted... Oh my gosh. It's the fucking rabbit. What the fuck? What the fuck? Oh no, I can't play that. I don't know what it... Wait. Outsworn Knight? No, I don't know what that does. Jeez. Okay, well, now that I've actually got some mana producers out, I can play my fucking Selesnya Signet. What? Oh my gosh. They turned Progenitus into whatever the fuck that is. Okay, someone has had so much fun with this. I can tap for 3 now. Yeah. Nope. Sorry. Not that one, this one. Night of Autumn. As you can see, it's kind of manual, and you can only play one side of it. You're really kind of playing solitaire with yourself. But, what turn am I on? Turn 5. Good grief. Turn 5 just made it to 3 mana. None of it's black. To cast Dread Whispers. Well, none of it's black to cast Oathsworn Knight either. Alright, well, you know what? We tried. Oh my god, Kinrith. I love the art in this. I love the sky, whatever the fuck this is, showing up so often. This was in my hand. I don't know enough Monty Python to... Oh my gosh. To really appreciate how Truly bizarre the art for this is, but it's fascinating, honestly. I love that they were able to put in custom art. Holy snap. Hi, Elk, in your general direction. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Nice. Oh my god, Knights of the Reliquary. I love it. On Dismember! Holy shit, that's the best joke in the whole deck. That's amazing. Wait, is there a goose? There's a goose! Nice. That's pretty cool. Amazing Soul Grail. Oh, that's actually a card. Wait, what? Okay. Oh my gosh, it's the Holy Hand Grenade. Also, the Trinket Mage with a Holy Hand Grenade. More Holy Hand Grenade. Blown Miami's bits. Well, apparently you can also do... Oh, neat. You can also do custom type, like... I don't know how they... I'll be honest with you. I don't know how they did most of this, but, also that's kind of funny. Apparently you can do this too. So, neat. Death awaits you all with big, nasty, pointy teeth. I love the art for this so much. Okay. Okay, this video is over. I'm done. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. You know, do the YouTube stuff. And also, while you're down there, I'm going to need you to click that link in the description and check out the rest of the Jackie Fox Media Empire. All of the videos, channels, podcasts, books, Discord, a little bit of everything, baby. Just go ahead and check it out, and I'll see you in the next one.